For most of human history, the average person smelled bad enough to legally qualify as a weapon. Not occasionally, not on a bad day, chronically, for centuries at a time. We're about to spend 20 minutes tracing humanity's long, reluctant journey from smearing animal fat on our skin to 11-step skincare routines. And I promise you, the middle section is worse than you're imagining. If you've ever complained about your gym not having enough showers, you are about to feel deeply, deeply spoiled. Subscribe now, because we're going in. Early humans didn't bathe for cleanliness. They bathed occasionally because rivers were cold and convenient, not because anyone had a concept of bacteria. The idea that invisible organisms were living on your skin wouldn't exist for another several thousand years, so functionally, nobody was dirty. Nobody could be. Dirt itself hadn't been invented as a moral category yet. What early humans did understand was smell, and even that bar was low. Archaeological evidence suggests early humans used animal fat, ash, and plant oils on their skin, partly for protection from the elements, partly because rubbing grease on yourself apparently felt better than the alternative. The alternative being nothing, and nothing was apparently intolerable even to a species that hadn't invented the wheel yet. There's also evidence of early combs and grooming tools going back tens of thousands of years, which tells you something important. Humans have cared about personal appearance since before we had permanent houses. We built shelter and personal grooming products at roughly the same evolutionary priority level. Make of that what you will. Ancient Egypt is where hygiene stops being an accident and starts being a genuine obsession. Egyptians bathed regularly, often daily, using natron, a naturally occurring salt combined with oils as an early form of soap. They also shaved their heads and bodies routinely, largely to avoid lice, and wore wigs instead, which means a huge portion of ancient Egyptian fashion was essentially a workaround for a parasite problem. Wealthy Egyptians used elaborate perfumes and cosmetics, some containing kohl for the eyes that doubled, unintentionally, as a mild antibacterial agent. So ancient Egyptian eyeliner was accidentally practicing medicine, which is more than we can say for most modern beauty trends. They also had early toilet systems, wooden seats over sand-filled pits, later found in some elite homes with more sophisticated drainage. Compare that to what's coming in a few thousand years, when medieval Europeans will essentially forget indoor plumbing exists. Egypt peaked early on this one, and then humanity, as a species, took a several thousand-year step backward. Ancient Rome deserves genuine credit here. Roman bathhouses were architectural marvels, massive public complexes with heated floors, cold plunge pools, steam rooms, and social spaces where citizens could bathe daily, often for free or nearly free. Bathing wasn't just hygiene in Rome. It was a full daily social ritual, roughly the ancient equivalent of a gym membership crossed with a coffee shop. Here's the catch. Romans, for all this infrastructure, had some genuinely questionable practices tangled in with the good ones. Communal sponges on sticks were used for, let's say, personal cleanup in public latrines, and shared by multiple people without much concern for what modern humans would consider a very obvious problem. Rome built some of the most advanced sanitation engineering in the ancient world, and then handed everyone the same stick. Roman aqueducts moved staggering amounts of water into cities, and their sewer systems, like the famous Cloaca Maxima, were genuinely impressive feats of engineering. For a brief, shining moment in history, humanity had figured out plumbing at scale. Then Rome fell, and Europe collectively decided none of this was worth remembering. Here's where the story gets genuinely rough. Contrary to the popular myth that medieval Europeans never bathed, people did wash, but medical opinion in the era took a hard, disastrous turn against full-body bathing, especially after plague outbreaks. Physicians began to believe that hot water opened the pores, and open pores let disease enter the body. So the dominant medical advice for centuries was, don't bathe, because bathing might kill you. This is, medically speaking, backwards in almost every possible way, and it stuck around for an alarmingly long time. Instead, people relied on dry cleaning methods, rubbing the body with cloth, changing linen undergarments frequently, and dousing themselves in perfume to mask odor rather than actually eliminating it. The entire European perfume industry essentially exists because, for a few centuries, the continent's medical consensus was, smell is a design flaw we can accessorize around. Public bathhouses, which had actually survived from Roman times into the medieval period, eventually got shut down en masse, partly over hygiene fears, and partly because they'd developed a reputation as venues for less than wholesome activity. So bathhouses didn't disappear because they were dirty. They disappeared because they got a little too fun. Royal courts weren't exempt either. Historical accounts describe monarchs who bathed only a handful of times per year, and the widespread use of heavy perfume in royal courts wasn't a fashion statement so much as damage control. Versailles, one of the most opulent palaces ever constructed, reportedly had serious sanitation issues, with historical accounts describing courtiers relieving themselves in stairwells and corners because there weren't nearly enough proper facilities for the number of people living there. Unlimited gold leaf, zero working toilets. Priorities. Soap itself has an oddly political history. Basic soap making, combining fats with alkaline substances, dates back thousands of years, but for a long stretch of European history, soap was heavily taxed as a luxury good. In Britain, a soap tax remained in place for well over a century, from the early 1700s until it was finally repealed in 1853. For over 100 years, the British government looked at basic personal hygiene and decided the correct policy response was to tax it like jewelry. This is the same government, incidentally, that would later be extremely concerned about public health during industrial-era outbreaks. The same outbreaks made significantly worse by widespread poverty limiting access to, among other things, affordable soap. Once the soap tax was repealed, production and consumption expanded dramatically, and cheaper, mass-produced soap became genuinely accessible to ordinary people for really the first time in centuries. Turns out, when you stop taxing cleanliness like a designer handbag, more people can afford to not smell terrible. Revolutionary policy insight. The 19th century is where hygiene finally, decisively, gets dragged into modern science. Once germ theory took hold, the same shift we covered when we looked at disease and religion, the entire justification for avoiding water evaporated overnight. Suddenly, doctors weren't warning people away from bathing. They were demanding it. Ignaz Semmelweis's hand-washing findings, initially mocked, eventually became foundational to modern medical practice once Pasteur and Koch proved germ theory conclusively. The same act that had been considered dangerous for centuries was now considered essential, and the flip happened within a single generation. Industrial cities also forced the issue, whether governments wanted to deal with it or not. Rapid urbanization packed people into crowded, poorly sanitized cities, and cholera outbreaks in cities like London killed thousands before officials finally connected contaminated water sources to disease spread. It took repeated, visible mass death for city planners to accept that maybe, possibly, putting sewage near drinking water was a design flaw. This era also produced modern plumbing as we'd recognize it. Indoor toilets, proper sewage systems, and eventually, running water in ordinary homes rather than just palaces. Humanity essentially spent the entire 19th century reinventing what Rome had already figured out 1,000 years earlier. Except this time, we kept the notes. By the 1900s, hygiene stopped being purely medical and became deeply commercial. Advertisers realized body odor could be marketed as a social catastrophe, and companies began selling deodorant, mouthwash, and soap with campaigns explicitly designed to make ordinary people anxious about smelling human. Listerine famously took a real but minor medical term, halitosis, and turned it into a full-blown cultural fear through advertising in the 1920s, convincing an entire generation that bad breath could ruin their marriage prospects. For context, we spent the medieval period believing bathing could kill you, and then a few centuries later, an advertising department convinced people that not using mouthwash could leave them permanently single. Humanity's relationship with hygiene has never once been rational. It's just changed which fear was doing the motivating. Daily showering, deodorant use, and elaborate personal care routines, largely unheard of just a century or two earlier, became not just normal but expected. A complete cultural reversal from an era when the medical establishment actively warned people away from water. So here's the arc. Humans smeared themselves in animal fat, built magnificent bathhouses, then convinced ourselves bathing was dangerous for roughly half a millennium, taxed soap like it was jewelry, and finally got dragged kicking and screaming back into the shower by germ theory and a well-timed advertising campaign about marriage prospects. The next time you take a hot shower without a second thought, remember that this exact act was, at various points in history, medically discouraged, taxed as a luxury, and considered scandalous. You're not just getting clean, you're winning an argument that took 12,000 years to settle. If you enjoyed watching humanity slowly, reluctantly figure out the obvious, subscribe. We've got a lot more of that history left to cover.